I'm curious. I'm going to ask the dumbest question I've ever asked on this podcast. So I apologize
I love
to
it.
the listeners, but why was this so impactful?
Why was this so impactful?
Why did it help
Yeah.
to have Mark Benioff sending emails for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great question, Colin. It worked. It worked like a charm. We would get these executives on. They would reply. They'd agree to meetings. Those meetings would turn into opportunities. Those opportunities would close and turn into revenue. That revenue would turn into happy customers. It became reference customers that we could leverage for even more introductions. And so the virtuous cycle just started and kept going and going and going and going, and to this day still goes over at Salesforce. So yeah, that's why it was impactful. And it's also just like kind of easy and fun. It was kind of like a giddy experience, honestly, being 26 or 27, and then being able to be like the puppet master behind the scenes with Mark Benioff, who, Mark wasn't as big a deal back then as he is now, but he was still a pretty big deal. And, it's kind of cool. Like, ooh, I get to program Mark to do whatever I want him to do, or these other executives, I can program them because our interests are aligned. That he wants us to be successful. And then, not only do I get to program Mark, but then I get to, get the reply from the CEO of this big publicly traded company that, now I'm on the thread with the CEO, and now we're in a deal. And, that was really cool. I mean, so in addition to just being pragmatic, like it creates revenue in a really easy way, it's also like really fun.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine getting a reply from a Fortune 100, Fortune 10 company where you're like, ghostwriting is Mark. That must be just the coolest response. I think the best cold email, who was it? I got a reply from who's the CEO of the NBA, the CEO of Walmart, and Activision. I think all replied to like cold email threads that I straight up sent them, which is pretty neat on behalf of other customers. This was like early days. And I'm curious, if you're sending this as Mark to a Fortune 100, you were in sales, you were a AE director, something along those lines back then. Mm-hmm. Is it now you sitting, like you show up to the meeting and it's like Fortune 100 and then, Drew the AE sitting there, or is Mark like, what is the next step? How does it go from, ghost email to Drew's pipeline?
Yeah. It depends on kind of the phase that we were at Salesforce, how big a company we were, and then how big a company we were selling to. That's kind of the way it boiled down. So like at the beginning, we were a small company, and if we got, a 100-person deal, might be a pretty big deal, which is now pretty trivial for Salesforce. But back then, I remember when we closed our first 100-user deal. It was a big thing that happened, and we all celebrated. And in those days, it was basically like you had to match power with power. And I think that's probably still true today. So if you are trying to get CEO of a reasonable sized company to show up for a meeting, and by the way, when we started Salesforce, there were no SDRs. There was no, I think Oracle had a concept that was kind of like SDRs. I think they called them inside sales or something. I'm not quite sure if it was even the same model as the.
I've talked to Lars about this. It was similar because I think Lars was at Oracle at the time.
Okay.
I think, and he was running what he refers to as a call center. And I don't think they called them SDRs. They called them something else, but they were specialized and they were just prospecting.
Okay. Then good. You know more than I do about this then. So we didn't have SDRs at first when we started doing this at Salesforce. Then we did add the first couple of SDRs. And I think it's like probably Matt Hahn and Kevin Robinson were the first two, I think, if I recall correctly. And then they were doing prospecting for us, and we were like, wow, that's really cool. It's like, I can't believe we're so lucky that somebody's going to do prospecting for us. It was a really neat idea. But if whoever was doing the prospecting, if it was, if I was doing it, or if Matt or Kevin were doing it, then the thing that you wanted to do if you're going after a senior executive was basically not even exist. You are the wizard behind the curtains, and you can pull all the strings, and you can write the email, but you want Mark or one of our other executives or a board member or one of our customer to send the message. You wanted somebody who had clout to send the message, and you as the SDR, in the totem pole, right? On the totem pole, SDR is the bottom, but the first stop on the totem pole. So most people don't really, like, a senior executive doesn't want to talk to an SDR. It's just like, don't offer that as the call to action. It doesn't make any sense. Senior executive might not want to talk with the account executive. It might not be enough, depending on the size of the companies involved and the size of the egos involved. What you might need to do is have, like in our case, have Mark Benioff send the email, and the proposal is, let's get on a call or let's have a meeting, and then set up that call or set up the meeting. And there were a lot more physical, in-person meetings that happened back then. And we did a lot of business in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So a lot of this, we would actually drive over and see somebody. And then the first meeting, basically what would happen is Mark would be the bait to get the meeting. We went down with a very senior exec at Apple, and that senior exec wouldn't have taken the meeting with me, but would take it with Mark. So we brought Mark down, and we set up an hour. And so we did that. It was the senior exec, it was Mark, it was me. There might have been one other person from Apple there. And Mark kind of drove that first meeting. And then at the end of it, it was, I'm taking notes and framing up what the next steps ought to be. And then Mark at the end essentially hands the baton to me and says, okay, Drew's here to help you and your team do the rest of the due diligence on this to figure out, if this is something you'd like to pursue. And that was the model. That happened a lot. So we would have the meeting, Mark or some other senior executive on our team that had clout, had the title, had the gravitas, had the gray hair, which I now have plenty of, by the way. So finally I got the gray hair. They would be there as kind of the bait and the executive sponsor for that first interaction. And that whole thing could have originated with the SDR. The SDR could be the one, the wizard behind the curtains who teed up the whole thing, and nobody at Apple would have any idea that there was an SDR involved in this whole thing. Their name never popped up, right?
Right.
And that happened over and over again. That was a very, very typical model. As a company got bigger and we had more executives who had more relationships, then Mark could scale. It wouldn't just be Mark having to drive down to Apple or, whatever company. We hired in hired in Jim Steele at some point, who came from IBM, and he had a huge Rolodex, and I don't know, like Jim's got pictures of like golfing with presidents and stuff like that. So he's a really well networked guy. And so, Jim became a really great substitute for Mark. We could use Jim as the bait and ran the same play, right? Like Jim's the bait. He does the first call or the first meeting with the account executive. Then the account executive picks up, all the work after that, works on the business case, does all the due diligence with the team at the prospects company. And then we come back 2 or 3 weeks later and present the final proposal and get a decision on moving forward with Salesforce. It was a super, super successful play. You need to, over time, you need to develop your leadership team. So you've got more and more leaders like that you can delegate to be the bait, take the first call, first meeting, and hand it off to the account executive to go run with it, and then come back and do that over and over and over again. Super, super effective.